Hello, and welcome to Deaf Artists Backstage. My name is Joey Caberly, and we're hosting this weekly because different deaf performers across the United States all have their own experiences, journeys, frustrations, and successes. So we're bringing them together week after week to share their stories. We're partnering with Gallaudet University's Theater and Dance program for this program. This week with us, we have Willy Conley. Before I introduce him, I want to mention that the captions you're seeing are all automatic. So we're relying on our interpreters, and the captioning is automated, so if there are issues with that, we apologize. It's my pleasure to introduce Willy Conley.
Hello. It is good to see you.
You as well. With coronavirus and everything, I hope that you're doing safe and well.
I am a healthy hermit. My beard's a little longer, but that's about it.
Willy, I've looked at your work and your stories and your journey and tried to unpack a lot of that, but there's so many layers. It's hard to really pinpoint which moments in your journey I wanted to talk about. So I chose a few. But first, can you talk to us about how you got into theater?
I have to say that I absolutely hated theater in junior high school and high school. My parents had actually taken me out to a large theater in North Carolina to see a play called The Lost Colony. And it was this huge production, and we sat way in the back. And I can just remember the actors looking like little ants running around on the stage. And I can't lip read ants. So the only parts that really caught my attention were kind of the special effect type things, the cannons going off. Instantly, my parents took me out because of the war scenes. And what I learned was that someone had actually thrown up on my mom's back. She was upset about her shirt, and I had no idea that any of it was happening at that moment. But it's a marked moment for me where someone threw up on my mom. And from that moment on, I decided that I just wasn't a fan of theater until I went to NTD at RIT, NTID at RIT, and I saw my first show, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and became enamored with it and knew that I wanted to be a part of that production. And then my senior year, I started to get involved with theater. I worked with a signing group called Sunshine and Company to do little short things, RIT events on campus. And then from there is where I really started to sprout off into my own theater company. And one of the last years I was there, we did A Different Man, where every man. And that was a production that really, really got me into theater. And that's when I knew that's where I was meant to be.
And after NTID, you went to the National Theater for the Deaf. And that was really the jumping point for the rest of your career, right?
There were some other things that had happened in between there. That would be a pretty big jump from NTID to the National Theater for the Deaf. I worked, I would say, about 5 years as a medical photographer after I graduated from RIT. I still would be involved in theater on nights and weekends when I wasn't working. And then I ended up moving out to California to work for Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA, well, in Beverly Hills specifically. And during those nights and weekends when I had off time, I would go to a really cool theater called the American Theater for the Arts. They have an ASL studies program for deaf actors. And I think that it was founded by Bob Daniels, the guy from Big River. It was that group of individuals at that time who were all working to establish that ASL acting program to really, at that time, I felt called to no longer be a medical photographer. I had heard that that school had opened up at NTD. They had a summer study program. And sorry, this is a really long story that I'm trying to summarize here. However, I just remember the American Theater for the Arts was run by hearing individuals. And then later, Bob, Linda, Ed, and that entire group decided to branch off and form their own scene study group called Visual Theater Workshops. With Mark, he joined in as well, and they were able to grow that program. Mark from Children of a Lesser God, he came in, and I think that's really what sparked my hunger. I knew that I wanted to leave the profession of medical photography. I think that I had hit my glass ceiling in that role. Was just in a dark room producing pictures, and it wasn't fulfilling. I had invested 6 years of study into it and decided to branch off at that point into theater.
And so at that point, you went into NTD's summer studies program and joined the company there. What year was that? Oh, no.
No, I actually didn't make it into the company my first summer. They were ready to do The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And I wanted that show. Oh, I wanted to be a part of that story. Unfortunately, I did not make it in. I had just moved from LA back to the East Coast, hoping that I would be a part of the production. And then while I was in summer school, the Fairmount Theater for the Deaf was auditioning actors. And they were asking me to come join them.
Fairmount Theater for the Deaf is where? Ohio?
The Fairmount Theater for the Deaf in Cleveland, Ohio. Yes. Camille was one of the ones who actually cast me into the company. I was with them for about 5 months, and then the checks that I was being paid started to bounce. Unfortunately, the theater was running out of money, so I ended up laid off and moved back home into my parents' house. If you can believe that, a very humbling moment, having to ask if I could come back home and live with my parents for a few weeks. And while I was in my parents' home, I tried to call, look for other theater work, reach out to my contacts. And it just so happened that NTID was having a show at that time, and they were hiring artists to become teachers. And Howie Seago at that time was there, and he was looking for lead actors. Howie reached out to me, and I ended up being invited in as one of the artists to lead that. And that led into the next summer, which took me back to the summer school for the advanced class. And then finally, I was offered a position within the company.
Wow, what a journey to get to NTD. So when you finally got into National Theater for the Deaf, you were with that company for how many years?
3 years.
3 years, okay. And you were involved in several productions with them.
Yes, I was.
One was The Debug, King of Hearts.
Yes.
And also The Odyssey.
Yep, you are exactly right.
And speaking of which, for our audience, we have a special clip to show you so you can see the work in progress of his involvement with the Odyssey. He played one of the lead roles. So this clip is from CBS Sunday Morning with Charles Kuralt.
Well done.
Let's view it now.
It is at the company's headquarters in a converted mill in Chester, Connecticut, that they get their plays ready for the road.
No sound at all, and then begin to build.
My new husband will be the man who strings this bow. Just string a bow.
Well, easy enough, but I'll go first.
Willy Conley, who has been with the company 3 years, plays the lead role of Odysseus.
Telemachus, bolt the door.
Oh, the front door?
Damn it, yes.
It allows me to be a big-headed braggart and a womanizer. All these things that I'm not really that way in real life. And I get to really stress that role a lot.
Baskets of cheese are stacked to the ceiling. Pans full of lambs and goats.
As a former actor at NTD, I remember feeling that way. And working for NTD, and really, honestly, any deaf theater company, there's that struggle of living paycheck to paycheck. And I think hearing companies experience that as well. But in our deaf companies, I believe there's more collaboration of bouncing ideas off of each other and making it through. Do you feel that way as well, Willy?
Yes, because it is such a small world of deaf actors, and we need one another to enhance our work and to help grow the field. We can't afford to try to exist in a vacuum or try to tear each other down. We have to be supportive because the network is so small.
And I've heard a lot about the show King of Hearts. Other than My Third Mind, I believe that King of Hearts is probably one of the largest productions NTD had at that time.
Oh, absolutely. I would have told you at that time that it was Broadway bound. Chuck Beard was actually doing a live painting of the set as it was moving around during the show. Chuck Beard painted it with the characters as well. He painted our set live while we were there. I've never seen anything like that done in a play before. It was completely new. And I thought for sure it would make it to off-Broadway at the very least.
Well, and then that show came to a screeching halt. Is there a video recording that NTD has of that somewhere? Hopefully there is.
You know, I'm not exactly sure. The Kennedy Center may have a copy of it. I believe that we performed there, and they typically film everything that comes to their center, but to find it would probably be quite the challenge. Whether they were able to catch it all, whether they had the appropriate equipment, I couldn't tell you.
So you were with National Theater for the Deaf for 3 years, living paycheck to paycheck, as you mentioned, on tours. What'd you do after that?
Well, I traveled for 3 years or so. And I wrote in my journal about my summer school at NTD. I remember writing some scenes for some new script work that I was developing. Shannon Mao, who was another company member with me, she was in the recent video about the Odyssey. We were tour roommates. So we often shared ideas and our writings, gave each other feedback and tips on our scripts. I started to get the itch and felt like we needed more deaf playwrights. I had informal training on how to write a play. And so I decided that I wanted to apply to graduate school specifically to be a playwright. I applied to Yale University and had the support of David Hayes, who's the artistic director, who was the artistic director at that time. I had the support of Dennis Colt, who was directing, or he was the chairperson at that time. I had his help as well. I sent my application off to Yale, and I believe there were over 200 applications that they narrowed down to 4 positions or 4 slots. I was interviewed for one of those positions. A famous playwright at that time was a part of that interview process, and all of the people that were vetted for this position finally ended up getting an interview for it. After the interview, I found out that I was not chosen as a candidate. They felt like my interview was good, but that I hadn't found my voice yet, if you will. And I guess what they meant was I had not found my style or brand of playwright yet. That was a really difficult moment for me. I decided to go ahead and go to Boston University because they have a playwriting program that is run by Derek Wilcott. So I applied there to Boston University and was accepted into their playwright program, and I got my master's degree. Derek ended up winning the Nobel Prize, actually, after I graduated. 1 year after I graduated, in fact, which is kind of something special to note.
And during that time, you studied writing. I believe you were the only known deaf playwright at that time. We had another person at the time who was writing adaptations, but I believe you were the only original playwright at that time, correct?
Yes, it was Shannon, was Bruce Leibach. There was Don Bangs, Steve Powen, Bob Daniels, Steve Baldwin, excuse me, and Bob Daniels. There were several people writing plays at that time, in fact.
So to go back when you were a medical photographer, you mentioned that you felt you had reached a glass ceiling. Did you ever feel the same way as a playwright?
In a way, I did, yeah. As my work related to center stage. Later, I became the associate for that center stage in Baltimore. I was chosen as one of those individuals. for that position. And then I got the National Theater Arts residency. And that actually was pivotal for my playwriting work, my involvement in their productions and plays. They would help pay for interpreters to be able to work with me and provide access for me. So that was what really grew our deaf audience. Plus, there were workshops for productions that left me afterwards wanting the next step, seeing that the audience responded really well to what was workshopped. And so I didn't end up taking it much further than that. So in a way, I would say that I hit my glass ceiling while I was there.
Fascinating. So you wrote several plays and adaptations. I was shocked by one of your stories that you told in a play you wrote. And you and I have had this conversation before. You wrote a short play called The Waterfalls. And in that play, you had a stage reading where I used to work at Olney Theater out in Maryland. And I worked there for 3 years. I don't know how I didn't know that you had had a stage reading out there before I had worked there. And I was touched by the beauty. And I realized why you wrote that play. So if you don't mind me sharing that, I will.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So you wrote that show originally as a poem to your grandmother having passed away while you were working at National Theater for the Deaf. And later, your grandfather committed suicide. So you took that poem and adapted it into a full-length play.
I did.
And you did the stage reading at Olney Theater, and I believe it went to Roundhouse Theater after that.
You've got that backwards. We did the stage reading at Center Stage, Roundhouse Theater, and then the full production was at the Olney Theater. That was directed by Miles Lakota. So I just wanted to make sure that I added that in.
Thank you for that. So as an artist, did that play, making it full length, give you some sense of closure?
Yes, that was not something that I wrote right after my grandfather's death. I would say it took about 10 years before I could write it as a way to honor both of my grandparents because they were such a huge part of my life. So in a way, yes, it was closure and a way of saying goodbye and grieving that, but also a way of honoring them.
My next big question is, through the stage reading and the full production that you did at Olney, how many years, what year was that? Do you remember?
At the Olney Theater, I want to say it was 1995, 1996, somewhere in the mid 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Were there subsequent productions of that, or was it the only company that did it?
Nope, it was a one-off. That was the last time that that play was performed, and it has not been performed again. There's some interest at Gallaudet, just because of some of the suicides and prevalent things that have happened. I think that it would be good to look at that as an artist, as well as have a societal discussion about it and help people through those healing processes who have been affected by suicide. I haven't thought that through completely, but it is definitely something that's on my radar.
So I'm relatively new to the theater industry as opposed to you. How do you as a playwright get your work out there? How do you get connections and make those productions happen?
I think that networking is the key to getting your work out there. Doing a lot of networking. I won't say that I had much success by sending off anything that I had created to companies just cold without creating those relationships first. Going to conferences and other theaters, meeting people backstage, networking, remembering names, following up with individuals, sparking those conversations. And then once the door is open, then you offer someone an opportunity to see your work. But I think that it all boils down to networking.
So one of my first impressions of you was my first year as a student at Gallaudet University back in 2007. When I came in that fall, I remember watching one of your productions, Goya en la Quinta del Sorado. Which means in the house of a deaf man. And I was blown away by this production because there was no speaking, no signing, no dialogue per se. It was all gestural. So ISOF did that production as well. Okay, thank you. He was your co-director. Where did you get the inspiration for that idea?
Iosef, this is his sign name. Iosef and I had been friends from back in NTID. As I was leaving as I was leaving the National Theater for the Deaf, Iosef was joining. He had just come from Russia. At that time, Deaf Way 2 was about to happen, and they were looking for some productions that had more of a global market or a global ability to be performed. So with Iosef, we thought that Goya would be a great show for that. And I said, why not make this visual, nonverbal with masks? And Iosef had a little bit of trepidation about it. You know, with mime, he's great. That's a great skill of his, but he challenged me about making it all of that, making it completely mime without language. So then we started to build the structure. And Iosef was amazing to work with, was just amazing to work with. I was able to move him around and get it choreographed beautifully for Deaf Way 2. And it was well received.
So that show was at Gallaudet University and then made it into the theater festival at Kennedy Center called Kennedy Center American College for the Arts Festival. And that's a regional competition with other theaters around the DMV area and other college productions. And then that's the regional competition to make it into the nationals. And you were nominated to make it to the national competition and then didn't go. There wasn't enough votes to actually make it in to the national competition.
Correct.
Do you think that that may have been because of a hearing committee that was electing and that may have ruined your chances to get into the national competition?
Right. So with Iosef in this production, there was a lot of the plays that were chosen were auditory based and very language heavy. And in my show, there was not a single utterance, not a single word spoken. And I think that that was a turnoff to some of those judges. Having to rely on using their eyes as their only form of taking in the play for an hour, I think may have been off-putting. I'm not sure. I don't have a great answer for that. The production was so completely different and looked so different. I really thought that it stood a chance.
And so that pivots our conversation to center stage. You brought in Wawa, and the production happened there. It brought in a lot of deaf audience members, and it instantly turned into a new position for you in terms of the artistic director, because the previous one had been let go. So I know that you invested a lot in your relationship with the deaf community there in your time, and it seems like it's gone. How do you move on from something like that?
Institutional memory is very short during those transition periods of leadership. I was under Irene Lewis, who was the artistic director for the center stage for many years. And under that leadership, it was very pro-disability, very pro being able to make these types of productions, very pro-diversity. However, once there was a change in leadership and they let her go to grow and move on, that was completely lost. There really wasn't a way to preserve it. The artistic team was disbanded as well at that time.
But you personally, how did you accept that hard change? What was that experience for you?
I really just channeled my work in a different way and tried to form new and different relationships with people. I got connected with the Imagination Stage and with the Quest Visual Theater. So there were some relationships that previous experience was able to feed into.
Well, and you teach at Gallaudet University as well. That was another moving on.
And I'm raising a family at the same time.
So one thing specifically that I admire about you is how much you've done in theater whilst facing a lot of obstacles. You've been very supportive. You've mentioned that in several areas you felt like you've reached the glass ceiling, but you've been able to break through that. So for the younger generation of artists like myself, we have you to thank for breaking those glass ceilings because of how you've educated us, because of how you've invested in us. You are very much an example of what a theater artist should be, and I thank you for that.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much.
Before we close for the day, what advice do you have for young aspiring artists and students that want to get into theater?
I believe that you should do whatever you're passionate about. And if that's theater, if that is your primary passion, let's say acting, you want to be an onstage actor, absolutely pursue that. At the same time, keep your mind open to other opportunities within theater as well. There's so many opportunities backstage. There's so much tech that can be learned and other aspects of theater. Acting is one thing, but if it is not available, then make sure that you have the skill set to be able to jump into what other roles could become available for you. And you've got those backup skills. Joey, you are a perfect example of that. You do stage carpentry and set carpentry. You've done lighting. You have quite a bit of broad experience, and one has kind of led itself into another, and that's created future work opportunities for you, right? I think that you're the perfect example of what a theater program should be doing.
A jack of all trades is what you're recommending for theater students, if you will.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this interview today.
To our audience, thank you for joining. We will be announcing who our next guest artist is. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, I'm not sure.